Good to have you with us tonight, folks. Thanks for watching. Rick Perry is doing major damage control one day after the Washington Post reported on an ugly racial slur painted on a rock at his West Texas hunting ranch. This headline sent shockwaves through the Perry campaign early Sunday morning. The Post reported in the early days of his political career, Rick Perry began hosting fellow lawmakers, friends, and supporters at his family's secluded West Texas hunting camp, a place known by the name painted in block letters across a large flat rock standing upright at its gated entrance. N-word, head, it read. Herman Cain took the first shot at Rick Perry on Fox News Sunday.
That is a more vile, negative word than the N-word, and for him to leave it there as long as he did before I hear that they finally painted over it, it's just plain insensitive to a lot of black people in this country.
Herman Cain was spot on, but his statement didn't sit well with the Texas governor. Perry communications director jumped all over Herman Cain's statement with a press release right after the show. Today, here we go, the drugster also attacking Herman Cain for calling Perry insensitive.
They're trying to say that Perry's a racist, and Herman Cain has jumped in and basically joined that chorus. And this is absurd. It is absurd. They painted over it. They tried to, when they leased it, they tried to paint over it and cover it up, and then they eventually turned it over so that people wouldn't see it.
Rush Limbaugh attacks Herman Cain. Herman Cain does a 180. Look at how the pizza man buckled to Perry right after Limbaugh took him to task.
I really don't care about that word. They painted over it. End of story. I think it happens. I accept Governor Perry's response on that, and I'm ready to talk about what's really important to the American people.
Just a different tune all of a sudden. Herman Cain isn't the only Republican trying to sweep this story under the rug. Rick Santorum and Ron Paul want to change the subject.
I don't believe Rick Perry's a racist. I think, I don't know all the details. There seem to be some arguments to what the details are. But to me, that's, I think that's a side issue.
I have no idea what the circumstances were. But in this day and age, to try to turn something around and make him say that he endorsed using that word, I think we should worry about the wars and assassinations, the economy, not trying to find out some way that you're going to blame Perry.
Well, Rick Santorum and Ron Paul, would you hunt at a ranch that was named like that? Fair question. Here's the deal, folks. The entire Republican field spent months attacking candidate Barack Obama for his ties to Reverend Wright. The conservative echo chamber called the relationship troubling and called Reverend Wright a reversed racist. Now, right-wing talkers are attacking the Washington Post and anyone else who questions Perry on having the N-word painted on a huge rock at his hunting ranch. Perry needs to quit hiding behind press releases and right-wing talk show hosts. There is no such thing as a side issue in a 21st century presidential campaign. Perry needs to face the cameras and explain why he didn't immediately remove the rock or cover the sign. Perry needs to explain why the sign was still visible when he took state legislators and campaign donors out to the ranch to just enjoy some hunting. I'm not calling Perry a racist. I don't have to. But it's more than troubling that he hunted at a ranch associated with a racist title, don't you think? Perry needs to come clean and disavow this type of racial rhetoric. Racism is still the dirty little secret of the Republican Party, and they always just push it right under the rug. And stories like this just underscore how deep it all runs. You know, I do remember when this story came up of a different sort when President Obama was running. He had to give a speech on race. I'd like to see somebody in the Republican Party give a speech on race and disavow themselves from garbage like this. Get your cell phones out. I want to know what you think. Tonight's question: does the Republican Party have a problem with race? Text A for yes, text B for no to 622-639. And you can go to our blog at ed.msnbc.com. We'll bring you the results later on in the show. Let's bring in Jim Moore of morethink.com and the author of the upcoming book, Adios Mofo, Why Rick Perry Will Make America Miss George W. Bush. Mr. Moore, good to have you with us tonight. Now, Rick Perry has said that it's an offensive name that has no place in the modern world.
Right.
What is the Rick Perry that you know and the one that you have researched and covered all these years? Is it the guy on the rock, or is it the guy that's now trying to mop this up?
He is not a racist, Ed. I will give him that. He certainly has appointed the most African Americans to statewide agencies of any governor in this state's history. He appointed a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court who is the great-great-grandson of a slave. But the governor's professed naivete about this ranch is a little bit difficult to accept. It's very disingenuous. He's told stories about going down there and camping on the Clear Fork of the Brazos River near this location. This isn't a name that popped up in the 1980s. It's probably been there since the 1800s. So he knew the name of it. The fact that during his tenure as a state legislator that he brought his colleagues out there to go hunting and he knew the name of the place sort of indicates a level of sensitivity that the guy did not acquire growing up in a region that is predominantly white. His large political problem at the moment, Ed, as you know, is that this story connects him to the old narrative of the South, and it's a troubling one that the Republicans don't want to be reminded about. That's why everybody you've just had on the air is stepping back and saying, let's let this go, because they don't want to hear about it anymore.
Well, does this help or hurt Rick Perry with the Republican base?
Well, that's a good question. I think the ugly little secret is that there's probably some very conservative members in the Republican Party in the South that this isn't really an issue for him, and in fact helps him with some of them. The more progressive thinkers in the Republican Party obviously will find this offensive, as do most other people in this country, but there's a part of the party that it's not really going to harm him with greatly.
How well is this story known in Texas? Is this folklore? Has this been around a long time? It goes back several decades. How well is it known?
It's not known at all. But what I will say about Texas is that even though the author of the Civil Rights Bill, Lyndon Baines Johnson, came from our state, we took to integration rather slowly. University of Texas football team was the last major university in the country to integrate. But there are parts of West Texas, there are parts of East Texas where integration went very, very slowly. And these kinds of names and these signs that hung on the edge of counties that looked to be municipally painted, offering warnings to African Americans about not being in the town when the sun went down on them. This sort of stuff has been around, but it hasn't been attached to a particular public servant at this point like it has Rick.
I mean, to knowingly take donors and lawmakers there with that name there, I think speaks volumes. And in fairness to it all, President Obama, at the time when he was a candidate, I mean, it just kept coming at him from the right wing about Reverend Wright. And, of course, his association with the Black Panthers, which was absolutely nothing. Yeah. So has Perry in 1 day or 2 days weathered this storm because the right-wing talkers are they just want to just get this out of the way and clear him in every... Do you see a comparison in any way here?
I think it's fair to make that analogy because the president did get beaten up pretty hard. What the Perry campaign has done is completely bungle this. His message team, his communications team should have said up front that the governor saw it, they covered it up, they made it go away, they took ownership of it and moved on. But instead they started parsing this business about it was 2004, it was 2008, we used the east entrance, and they really have not been able to separate themselves from it. And in fact, they can't. They knew it was there, and he didn't manage this well.
Well, his silence is deafening. He's hiding behind press releases and looking for help from right-wing talkers. Jim Moore, always a pleasure. Thanks for your time. Now let's turn to Dr. James Peterson, Director of Africana Studies at Lehigh University and blogs for the Huffington Post, and Republican strategist Joe Watkins. Gentlemen, good to have you with us tonight. I want to play this sound cut from Hannity's radio show today. This is Mitt Romney. This is how one of the candidates responded to the term.
I think it's offensive. I think most people recognize it's offensive. And with regards to what involvement the Perry folks had with this situation, well, that's something to address to Governor Perry, obviously.
Is that enough, Joe Watkins? Your thoughts?
I think Mitt Romney's right. I think he makes a good point because the word is offensive. And it's a hurtful word, and whoever wrote that word offended a lot of people and hurt a lot of people. The good news is that Governor Perry wasn't the one that wrote it, but so it's not a sin of commission on his part there because he didn't write the word, but there's maybe a sin of omission because he didn't move quick enough to make a comment about how awful and offensive that word is and that it should have had no place on that campground to begin with.
Well, then, James Peterson, why doesn't he come out and say just what Joe Watkins is saying?
He's afraid that he's going to alienate certain areas of his base. He's afraid that folk will feel that he's embracing the issue of race, and the Republican Party obviously does not want to do that.
I don't think so.
Politically, it's not a good idea for Perry to do it, but in terms of just civility, he should do it.
No, you have to consider, here's a guy who named the first black Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court, a black chief of staff for his own staff, named more blacks to positions in the state of Texas. Stand on your record. Just tell the people what you've done and what your record shows you've done so that people know that you're not an insensitive person. I think it's a good message. It's a message that brings us together.
Joe, you're right. But the thing is, the reason why he's not doing that right now and the reason why they're going through this political calculus is because he's more interested in damage control than the sort of civil nature of this kind of issue. The problem with this is it has much less to do with Rick Perry and whether or not he's a racist, and much more to do with the ways in which racial residue still exists in our society. I mean, this is, when we talk about the enthusiasm gap on the other side of this political equation, here's something to get enthusiastic about. Here's someone who entered into the national stage and who obviously has some sensitivity issues around issues of race. He may not be a racist, but the bottom line is when he invited folk to that ranch and when he even purchased it, to not come out publicly then and to denounce this name and talk about a new vision for this private property that they bought, that's where he made his first mistake, and now that mistake is coming back to haunt him.
And it's a fixable mistake because the way you fix it in this country is you admit it and you say, I'm sorry it happened.
Well, he hasn't done
Let
that.
my record speak for itself. I'm sorry that it happened. You should know who I am and what I'm about, and the people around me and my record speak for themselves. That's what he should say.
Joe Watkins, wouldn't this be an opportunity for Rick Perry to give a speech on race?
Well, I don't think the door is yet closed on him to do that. He could have that opportunity if he wants to grab it. I think he wants to talk about all the other things impacting the economy right now. He wants to talk about putting Americans back to work and what he would do if he was president of the United States. But maybe he needs to address this. Maybe this is a teachable moment for Americans.
And at the same time, Joe, he's got to also address the death penalty and its racist and biased policies in the state of Texas. He's got to address the ways in which black and brown folk are limited to menial labor across that state. He's got to address the ways in which education has adversely affected black and brown folk in his state. If he's going to address the issue of race, it's going to open up a whole can of worms. And I'm telling you, if the folk around him are imploring him not to do so.
And I think it would be good to ask all of the Republican candidates if they would go hunting at a facility like that with that kind of a name, or is that not fair?
That's a fair thing to ask, and I'm sure they wouldn't go there. They wouldn't.
But yet they're slow to condemn it, though, Joe. I mean, they didn't touch this for a while.
Well, no, I applaud Mitt Romney. He came right out and said he was probably the first candidate to come out and say that the word is offensive. And I think he's
ironically,
Herman
Cain was the first person to come out, but he had to backtrack off of that. I don't think that Mitt Romney was strong enough here to be honest.
What do you make of Herman Cain's 180 after Limbaugh took him to task on the radio show, Joe?
I think Herman Cain is being consistent with his ministry because he's also a minister, and he knows that you forgive people when they say that they're sorry.
So he listens to Limbaugh and has a change of heart on ministry? That's a good one.
No, what it is he heard from Governor Perry and was satisfied with Governor Perry's answer.
I'm not satisfied. I'm not satisfied. I would like for Mr. Cain to now address this issue within the context of him talking about black folk being brainwashed. Because
Herman Cain is a brilliant candidate. The reason why he's in the top tier of candidates coming from the bottom tier is because he is so good on the issues, and he has a plan to put Americans
Joe, I think you could make the case here that Herman Cain, on one hand, he says that black folks are brainwashed by the Democratic Party, but maybe that rock might have had something to do with it.
Thank you, Ed. This is connect the dots here.
Gentlemen, great to have you with us tonight. It's always great to have both of you with us. Dr. James Peterson and Joe Watkins here on the Ed Show tonight. Remember to answer the question there at the bottom of the screen. Share your thoughts on Twitter at Ed Show. We want to know what you think. The frenzy to get New Jersey Governor Chris Christie into the presidential race proves one thing. The Republican Party really doesn't like its current crop of candidates. But would Christie stand a chance with the new brand of Republican voter? I'm not so sure. And Hank Williams Jr. did not ask me if I was ready for some football tonight. He visits the kids on Fox and Friends and compares President Obama to Hitler. ESPN responds by pulling Hank's Monday Night Football theme song. We'll bring it to you. We're right back.